defining trait of an English nation that speak no other languages. So I hope, please shout if I'm talking too quickly. I know all your English is absolutely brilliant, so you'll be able to understand exactly what's going on. But if anything is unclear, please just shout, or certainly afterwards, just let me know. So, thanks for asking me. It's not, I was just saying earlier, it's not often I do this, because it takes quite a lot of time, and actually we spend a lot of time kind of doing and not necessarily reflecting. And actually, some of the very generous words you said earlier, I think, are really relevant, and actually I listen to and think, oh, actually, yeah, that's kind of what it is a bit like. So I've put together quite a lot of work here. There's way too much to go through, and you'll all be flagging if I go through a lot of it. So then it might be a point where we just cut it. But I wanted to try and talk through maybe a few projects in depth, just to try and, I guess, articulate some of my interests, some of the studio's interests, some of what we do. I'm kind of guessing that there is a sort of design connection with most of you here. Some of you may be designers, I know you have designers here. So apologies if I'm talking in kind of simplistic terms, but actually I'm kind of talking, I suppose I'm talking to myself in a way. So as much as anything else, I'm trying to simplify it for myself. In a way, this talk's trying to be like trying to do a bit of work. So I thought I'd start off. Where do you begin? I mean, it's very odd. I've been with Graphic Thought Facility for too long, over 23 years. I've been a partner there for 16 years. It was founded in 1990 by my other two partners, Paul and Andy. And we work in London. We're a London-based design studio. That's our studio. I put it up. Why did I put it up? I thought it was good to put it in context, really. We're quite small. We fluctuate, but there's only 15 of us, including Paul, Andy, myself, and another creative director, Robbie. All of the directors, Paul, Andy, and myself, we're also designers, and that's how we started. We run a business, but that's really only kind of part of what we do. Some of you may run studios, and some of you may run small studios, and from that point of view, this is a kind of small studio. We run it in a fairly informal, sometimes haphazard way, albeit there's enough people to try and have to sort of turn over a certain amount of work in order to kind of keep the cogs turning. I just thought it was kind of helpful to put it in context. So I kind of sit over there, and this is what we eat, and this is what we work, and there's nothing kind of weird or kind of scary about it. There's going to be a real mix of work here, and one of the lovely things about doing a talk like this is that I can delve into kind of all of our back catalogue, and I guess the inclination is to go straight to new work, but actually some of the most important work, and maybe some of the most relevant work to this talk is old, or older. And I put this in very quickly today. The reason I put this in quickly today is because this is an exhibition that was held at the ICA in London in 1996. So it's quite a long time. One of my very first projects actually I did with Graphic Thought Facility. And it's a collective exhibition, collective design exhibition. And it was, the ICA is a contemporary art gallery, Institute of Contemporary Arts gallery situated in Pall Mall, just up from Buckingham Palace in London. And this was the very first design exhibition. I put it in for a couple of reasons. One, because this was a collection of fairly freshly graduated young designers that had a common interest. And two of those designers I met at the airport when I landed today. I thought, that's so strange. After all those years, two separate people independently appeared. So I thought, this has got to go in. But it's relevant for a few reasons, because I think it touches on a lot of themes. So the exhibition was called Stealing Beauty, and the common ground for Stealing Beauty were designers, I guess, that had some connection or some interest in the vernacular. And originally we were asked to be in it. And and we declined. And the reason we declined is because, and I guess this is another important bit, and I guess this also goes back to the naming of the talk, which is called Other People's Problems, which is that we are definitely commercial designers. We're not artists. We work to a brief, and from that point of view, that's what we kind of deal with. We deal with other people's problems. And I guess one of the things we're kind of interested in is and the reason we work to a brief is that I guess we look for solutions within a problem, and if the problem doesn't exist, then there's no reason for us to kind of look. And the reason we look for the problems, the solution in a problem, is that ideally that then reflects back at you what the project is about. And I think as a result of that, we've been lucky enough often to end up in kind of creative worlds. I think possibly because a sort of sense of us being kind of authors is not necessarily present there. It's a little bit more distant because we're trying to extract a solution from the thing that's delivered to us. We're not trying to impose our own kind of language on it, in a way. And I think this is a really good case in point. So this was Stealing Beauty. We were asked to be in it, and we declined, and instead give us the problem of designing an exhibition. So there's not really much, from a design point of view, there's kind of not a huge amount to say, in that it was two very simple elements. It was a signage system that was used using a kind of everyday engraving system that you might find in any sort of common town, where on a key fob for a hotel or on a sign sort of warning you, not to touch, on a kind of control panel. Quite analogue, really, quite kind of basic. But we used it in a much more kind of grand way, I guess. And we used it to do freehand drawings, and we used it to do very large typography. So it was trying to take something that was very familiar, but just to turn it a little bit. And then the second part was a catalogue. Again, it was a kind of very sort of simple offer, really. It was about a kind of collection of elements, a collection of stories and a collection of photographs collected together and bound together in something that was found. Now, it's in some ways I look at this now and it sort of doesn't feel unfamiliar. When we originally did it, it felt very different, not least of all putting it into the context of this rather smart, contemporary gallery setting. So this was a very sort of simple cone binding. All the typography, or the headline typography related back to the engraving signage that you saw earlier, that came straight from the engraver's pentagraph. The front obviously referencing back to the debris that was cut away from it. And then inside, very, very simply, a collection of things, a collection of objects bound in, held together, made common by this one binding technique. So, postcards. This tour of one of the designers I found is at the airport today. And you're actually also at the airport today, so strange. And then very simple questionnaires for the exhibitors that were handwritten, copied, put back in. So the character and the personality of each exhibitor was there. And then these were bound very simply for the exhibition boards that work themselves around the space. And then at the last minute, a champagne supplier became a sponsor, so we got 10,000 labels and they were all bound in. So I look at this now, and it's quite hard to look at things objectively 20 years later. But in some ways, I'm still sort of looking at it, quite proud of it, and I still look at it and think, actually, those are still some of the things we're exploring. Solutions which are very simple, solutions which are quite effortless, solutions that become purposeful because they're sort of solving a problem. A comb binding becomes interesting because it's doing a job, which is sort of an obvious thing to say, but I think as designers sometimes you miss that. Sometimes you always try and be too clever. I have to say, I usually have my notes on here, so the notes are on here, so I'm just having to try and think back. I guess in the way of taking something you might find in the stationer's department and putting it in a contemporary art exhibition is a kind of interesting tension or odd contrast. This is another quite old project, which again I think is explains quite clearly an area of interest we've got, which are points of contrast and points of kind of tension. I've got to give you a little bit of backstory on some of these projects, because I'm just going to keep a backlog of the story, backstory on these, because they become relevant once you know the kind of context. So this is a theatre on London's South Bank. It's the Globe Theatre, and it's Shakespeare's. It was one of Shakespeare's, that and the Rose, theatres that Shakespeare built back in the 1500s. And it's kind of extraordinary in many ways because it was reconstructed about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, headed by a man called Sam Wanamaker, an actor called Sam Wanamaker. And it's kind of extraordinary because it's built, I think there's not a single screw in it. It's built to how it was originally should have been built. All the materials are exactly the same. And everything is done inside it is done as it would be done, or would have been done. They do modern things, but there's a large atrium in the middle where everyone can stand, and it's quite rough, and you can come and go, and you can drink, and you can kind of shout if you want to. And there's this interaction between the crowd and the stage. And when we were working there, the artistic director was an actor called Mark Rylance, who now actually just acts, film star, I guess now. And he had an incredible kind of vision in that when you look at this, it kind of looks like a sort of something you might go to a sort of for a school visit, you know, sort of history piece. But he had this kind of vision that he wanted to try and contemporize it, I guess, for want of a better term. And they asked us to look at the kind of graphics. And in a way, for us, I think it's a really interesting project because in some ways it's quite straight, but in other ways it's quite sophisticated as a sort of environment. You know, it's an environment that on one hand could be seen as a bit of a kind of a history piece or a bit of a kind of museum. But there's also the opportunity to have really interesting creative dialogues going on in that. You know, they do new works and as well as original works. And also there is a sense of quality. So they do a lot of productions in what they would call original practice. And that is no lighting, or very little lighting, everything by candlelight. All the materials and all the clothes are made as originally as they would have been. So there's a lot of kind of quality there. When we originally commissioned, or when originally we were given a set of photographs to use, we were given these, which was like, yeah, kind of okay, but I'm not sure how creatively interesting that is. It's almost kind of given me what I kind of know already. And then right at the end of the film was this picture, which the guy had taken literally by accident. He was just running for film. This was the days when we were doing film on digital. And immediately there was something like, actually, you know, happy accidents, something kind of interesting going on here. This is a photographer called Nigel Shafran, who, if you don't know him, I really would recommend you go and do some Googling on him or look up some of his books. He used to be a fashion, he started off in fashion and now kind of does his own thing. He's a little bit in fashion still. But his traits are kind of, I guess, the natural, sort of naturalism, everydayness, and trying to elevate everydayness to sort of kind of give it a sort of grandeur, partly through the process of photographing and partly through the process of, sort of selecting and framing. So, this was a very simple study he did at Washington. And we really liked his work, so we got him in to try and take these kind of ordinary situations and elevate them to sort of pull out these kind of contrasts. And that then led to what became the poster image, which was this piece. I can't remember who the characters gave the dress, but you've got all this kind of weird tension of this kind of beautiful, kind of romantic light against all these little chips of modernness. So the fact that the Nike trainers are still being worn, and the fact that you see the exit sign and the modern interventions that you have to have in any kind of modern building, the water cooler or the fire alarm. And there was this kind of sort of double take thing, which had a real kind of appeal. On one hand, it was sort of quite kind of elegant and grown up. On the other hand, it was kind of a bit daft. And that's what we found really interesting. I think as a problem with a brief like this, you're trying to bridge quite a lot of different audiences, as well as trying to fulfill your own kind of creative ambitions. Very simple typography. And then how it worked within a catalogue or a brochure. So some of them were quite straight, but then Nigel has this really beautiful way of articulating what's in front of him in a very kind of effortless way. So really, it was only really about putting him in there and getting him to photograph what he could see. Kind of points of contrast and sort of playing games, I guess, putting things in context which you wouldn't necessarily expect, but doing them in kind of gentle ways. It's really important. This is a building in the south of France. This is mid-construction, Frank Gehry building, for the art foundation, Legal Foundation. They're opening, Legal Foundation is a philanthropic organisation that supports the arts. They're building in the south of France in an area called Parc des Ateliers, exactly that, an art park. So it'll be a cultural venue, and at the heart of it, I guess like all good art environments, is a Frank Gehry building. It's a kind of odd sort of mixture of technology, but also reflecting the organic landscape. So it's kind of, I guess, partly organic, partly futuristic. So there's this kind of odd kind of hybrid of stuff made up of these kind of blocks. This was thrown in at the last minute just because I got permission to do this, and I wanted to talk about this because it's a new project, and I think it still touches on a lot of the things which we're still, a lot of things we're interested in. Coding, computer coding. This does relate. I will come back to why this is connected. Monospace typefaces, typefaces that work in a kind of grid. Things that work in structured ways. They're kind of interesting. The fact that you have got a kind of sort of very geometric, formalised, everything being squashed into a kind of space. And it seems to have some kind of resonance with the building somehow. They're not very sophisticated, I guess. This is an art venue. It's a kind of grown-up place. It's has what will be a world-renowned artistic program. The monospace brings with it a certain kind of awkwardness, a certain kind of clunkiness. So it's trying to find ways to kind of give it qualities that were a little bit more sophisticated. And I think this is where this started to become interesting. Can we take something that's inherently quite unsophisticated, or rather, something that's been pushed or shoehorned into a space, and try and make it quite sophisticated? There was something interesting I really liked about it in that you had this oddity in the M. So you've got the L, and the A, which really could be from any, but a lot of different sans character sets. But the M was definitely odd, partly because it was squashed, but you had this kind of weird kind of contrast. This seemed like a spot of tension. So we started looking at the way actually, if you were a fashion brand, and this kind of goes back to something else, which I'll talk a little bit about later, but trying to look at good ways to use good cues or good cliches. If you were, say, a fashion brand or something sophisticated, you might open it out, you might give it some spacing. Okay? So actually, once you start giving some spacing, it becomes, you know, kind of a little bit more interesting. It has to be part of the system because Luma exists as many different things. So Luma Arm is where the building is, Luma Foundation is the kind of mother brand, I guess you could say. Luma Westbau is in Switzerland, and Zurich is another gallery. There was a sort of elegance about it. There was a kind of clunkiness and an elegance about it, and there was this point of I guess, not quite knowing where it sat, which we really liked. The fact that within a kind of glut of other maybe marks that it might be associated with, it kind of sat okay. The other thing we really liked was, and this is again, it's sort of being purposefully slightly oblique, which is it was very long. The starting word wasn't Luma, the starting word was Luma Foundation. And we quite like the idea of actually, can you make it even longer? Can you actually make the brand a kind of thing about space rather than a thing about hard marks? It doesn't come without its problems, that idea, by the way, but that was the thinking. And then at the other end, when you get into marketing, the typeface can have all of this kind of character, all of this kind of, you know, odd indentations that you find in the building, and I guess carry enough character to give it some identity. And the nice thing about a monospace typeface, it all fits the same space, so why not range it down? So if you've got a book spine, why not range it down? Reduction. I think that's probably another good theme in our work, or another appropriate theme in our work. I think a lot of the time we're trying to hone down a problem and try and get to the absolute hub of something, the kind of small, kind of little detail of something, and then use that as a vehicle to sort of extrapolate and kind of make it explode. This is a product called Formwork for Herman Miller, the American furniture company. It's designed by Sam Hecht from an industrial facility, who is someone we've worked with quite a lot. And it's a product for the desk. That kind of explains it all. It's a very reduced product that has a number of different variables in the way that it can kind of stack and build. So the product was kind of interesting. The product was interesting in its own right because it's such a reduced thing. It's such a sort of simple thing, and the fact that it has this kind of character, particularly if you made it very extreme. So we started looking about ways this thing could be used. This thing would obviously house things. It would hold things. It it's there to receive stuff. But we thought, what if this stuff was as reductive as the product itself? So it was all about little chips of colour, things just filtering around in this very monocolour landscape. Richard Hamilton, another big influence. We always really like this piece of work. What's going on in the background? You might know that. Really beautiful print, huge big slab, you can't see there, of silver. But we like this again, how could you make something sit in an environment and feel like something's happening or something's beyond, but actually tells you kind of nothing. So these things were really a kind of exercise in complete reduction of everything, including colour, and then just using the most sort of symbolic spots to allow things just to give you a hint of what things could be. And I mean, the product does it for you. There's hardly anything to do with it. So really, it's about what you don't do in some ways with a project like this, I think. And then a little digital film. I guess another project that's about stripping back and about just letting what needs to be there do the work. But in doing that process can often be quite hard, quite complicated. You know, doing less is often, I think, much harder. Getting to sort of a real essence, a real kind of truth about something, I think is often much harder. Not our logo, but a way to introduce it, COS, which I assume they seem to be everywhere now, but do you know COS? Is that okay? So, a high street fashion store. We do a lot of publishing, we do a lot of books, and COS had an idea for a book, their first book that they were going to self-publish, which was based around an idea formulated by this woman. This woman's called Usha Doshi, and Usha is I've got to get this right, she's the chief head pattern cutter at COS. Now, if you know a lot about fashion, you might know how important that is. If you don't know much about fashion like I did, it's a kind of learning curve, and I'll try and take you quickly on that journey. So, COS, what did COS do? COS, I guess, were a big kind of revolution on the high street, in that they were able to produce clothes that had real sort of sense of detail at a high street-ish price. And one of the reasons they were able to do that was of Usha. Usha used to be the chief physician at the Royal College of Art, and when they started COS, they brought her in because they knew they needed someone who could engineer. She's a kind of, I guess that's the good term for it, she's a kind of like a structural engineer would be to an architect. She's the person that can make something be built or something be made. And particularly for a high street brand, that's really important, because if you're sewing an extra seam on or you're putting an extra part on, that's minutes, and that's time, and that's money, and that's extra cost to the public, to the consumer. So she's pretty important in COS, and I think actually, well, she's very significant to their success. Anyway, she'd come with an idea. She had an idea. She'd created an idea which she kind of discovered by mistake, by accident. She'd been playing with her grandchildren, and she'd been trying to stop an argument. So to stop an argument, she'd given them some material and a tiny little third maquette, which if you're a dress designer, you know they sometimes come in these little tiny sizes. And they were using it to dress it like a sort of doll almost. And she saw that they were cutting shapes, and depending on how they folded them and sewed them and unfolded them, they were producing these kind of extraordinary, weird shapes, sometimes very slight and sometimes very kind of sculptural. And by cutting a hole or a square or a triangle or a circle or an oblong or a simple shape, and depending on how you put it together, how you folded it and how you revealed it, she created all these kind of details which as she says, in her life, in her world of pattern cutting, she had never seen anything like it before. It was a total accident, and what it allowed her to do was kind of extraordinary drapes and extraordinary bits of detail, but very, very effortlessly. So she had had this idea, and Cos had wanted to produce the book based on it. Because she felt it was such a revolutionary idea, she wanted to give it away. I think in truth, she probably, if you were a younger designer, you would have made a whole career out of it. But at her age, she just wanted to give it away. And Cos wanted to support that. So this is what we got. She came to us with meticulous drawings that she'd worked up with her assistant to try and explain every possible not every possible, but the variation she'd worked through, and a set of very simple snaps, really. That's the principle of it. You take a shape, you fold it, you stitch it, you reveal it. Not necessarily a piece that size, but depending on what you want to make, it's obviously bigger. And it creates very simple things. And so we kind of knew there was a sort of inherent reduction to it because it was so simple, but what it produced was quite complex. I didn't know at the time, I've since realised there's this kind of correlation between, there might be architects here, between pattern cutting and architecture. That there's this sort of link between how things are formed in fabric and how things are created structurally. So there was a sort of, and also I guess a lot of it was also quite sculptural. So just purely in the abstract, they were kind of quite sort of potentially quite beautiful. So they could perform very simple things. They could perform quite a little bit more dramatic things. They could perform quite abstract things. But what we knew we wanted to do, we wanted to create, although they were objects that potentially could be pinned to a mannequin, they were also kind of abstracts in their own right. So from the offset, we were trying to avoid making clothes, although that's what she does. She makes things, she makes objects, clothes, bags. It was a device that could be used in other disciplines, so it could be used in hat making, or it could be used in shoe design, or it could be used in sculpture, or maybe it could be used in architecture. So although at the heart it was about dressmaking or making clothes, we wanted to kind of abstract a little bit and to play more on kind of form and shape, kind of reduce it in a way. So the starting point, I'm going to try and lead you through the book rather than kind of jump into the kind of core of it. That's what it's about. It's about the shapes. Then we had this wax material, which we found the kind of last amount of, just enough to produce the book, which wrapped this and carried a very sort of simple title. So like many books, books are sum of parts, and I think particularly in the area that we often work in publishing, which are kind of the creative worlds, or I guess mostly galleries, you're often working not to upstage the work, not to be kind of too kind of clever. So you're looking at all the tools, all the resources you have to hand to support that work, but to allow the work to kind of exist and breathe. So it might be the materiality on the front of the book, the weight of the paper, the way the grain of the paper sits, the end tapes, the wrap, the weight of it, the physical size, all these kind of small elements come together to make something that's quite complete and quite whole. The idea of the book was to be totally neutral, or to be as neutral as possible. Everything was shot in monochrome. There was one type size through the whole book, and everything was laid out in the most simple way we could, either double images or type an image. A little bit about the type. Cos's house typeface, for want of a better word or better term, is gill. Classic Roman proportions. We redrew another typeface with classic Roman proportions, Baskerville, Frieze Baskerville, which we redrew for the book, taking out some of the lighter weights so we could use it at some of the small sizes. So there's this kind of inherent link between the two. So again, quite small things that are not, wouldn't necessarily be shouting at you, but they're kind of small details to sort of keep it within a kind of world that you're kind of working in. very simple photography, which we just let things be. So whether things were frayed, sometimes very simple, sometimes very dramatic. And then very simple pairings. So there was one style of photography ran through the whole book. The one kind of thing that we decided that we do right from the onset was have this gradient that ran through the whole book. So and that partly came from a sort of functional thing, because it guided us how we were going to lay the book out. So it kind of began to lay itself out in a way. We kind of structured the layout from the beginning. And it was also, because the book was so reduced, it gave this little sort of touch of flavour, and a kind of, I guess, a reason for us to choose a dark background over a light background. So rather than having to make those decisions on the fly, or to come back and be disappointed because actually we wanted a dark one there, we made all the decisions up front. And then internally, there was just this little reiteration about the shape that ran through. So on all the dividers that divided each shape, the book was divided into chapters that referred each kind of shape that Usha dealt with. We had this punch that just cut through everything. And then I'm sure people who make books here know books are made in sections. So if you start with a page, you have that page wrapping around, coming with a side. We didn't always need that page. This material, this stock change here, which was different to other material, would wrap around, and if it hit a page, we would just let it exist. We would just cut it back and let it exist. So you had this kind of selvage, like material selvage, the edge of material running through. And then, not forgetting it was a workbook with simple diagrams that worked their way through. And then right at the end, I guess conscious that this was a kind of book that really was a kind of book of play, we then did a set of imagery, which originally we experimented with, actually, do we render these things or do we photograph them? Because actually there were such extraordinary things. We did tests with 3D renderers, and they could do the most extraordinary kind of, by putting in the detail and information, they could come up with these kind of extraordinary shapes. We actually ended up photographing this ourselves. So not ourselves, but photographing with Angela, or the photographer, in actual materials. And having gone from a book which was about the most neutral material we could find, which was calico, which is what is traditionally used to make toiles or test pieces of clothing out of, we had a moment at the end where we just played. This is a project which we worked on for about 12 years, up until about 4 years ago. And it's an important project for us. One, I guess, because it was a significant inroad into the art world, which we've always worked in. And it's significant because it's a very, I guess, very pure body of work. The idea that we went with on day one was the idea that we went away with on year 12. This is Frieze Art Fair, which is an art fair that's held annually in London's Regent's Park. It's now held in New York in May. This is held in October in London. And it's now about to start in LA as well. It then grew beyond that to a sort of sister event, which is Frieze Masters, that deals in not contemporary work, but modern and everything backwards, back to antiquities. So, right in the middle of London, very unusual. We've got a lot of green space in London, Regent's Park, and kind of, I think they were one of the very first organisations that were able to hire it. And like the circus coming to town, they would build this big tent. Oh, thank you so much. Is that funny? So we started off very simple, type mark, very robust. There's not really so much to say at the time. It was a kind of, these things kind of evolved really as much as anything else. But the idea was, it was almost like, I guess, it was something you might be stamped on the side of the kit that was rolled into the tent. It was robust enough to survive, quite temporary setups, which is what happened over the years. It was applied by different architects in different ways. So there were some formal reasons for that mark to be like it is, that it could evolve into a single line, that it could stack, that it had a frame device that would hold secondary bits of information. And in the first year we did something really simple, because what we decided early on is that it's really hard to use photography or to use anything kind of creative imagery for an art fair. What do you choose? You either choose a hero image, which is really hard, because this is an art fair that culminates lots of different galleries and there's all kinds of political issues. Or do you do something artful that then could be construed as art and not as marketing? And so we kind of set ourselves a task, actually. We want to try and produce imagery, and that's what we began to do. So in the very first year, we did something very simple, very kind of straight in a way, which just worked through the seasons. Because the venue was so strange, so unusual that you were going to this urban landscape, that it was going to be held in an open space. We just used the environment and based everything on the environment. But what that set up was a kind of system or a kind of way of thinking that allowed us then to begin to kind of play in subsequent years. So the second year, it was all about how the circus was constructed. And then by the third year, you can start to people kind of get it. They start to understand it's not artfulness, it's design. So you can start to be a little bit more playful about animals in the park. And again, always trying to centre it on the subject of the park. Fourth year, you can start a little bit more intervention, start to be a little bit more artful. People have got it by now, it's not art. This is pre-drones, where we kind of had to chaperone someone in and create a little tiny helicopter with a lawnmower to create these little scenes that viewed over Regent's Park. The world of the kaleidoscope, the fauna in the park, plants and fauna, and flowers and fauna. Creating rainbows. Every time it changed, this was year on year, creating artificial rainbows. Then celebration, year 10. Daylight fireworks. Fashion photographer Miles Aldridge. And then a new fair opens, New York. So, and again, in kind of an unusual location. Randall's Island, a little further out from Manhattan Island. UV photography, it's kind of this weird, eerie area, so it's trying to find a method of photography that was, could almost, I guess, accentuate that kind of oddness of the location. So very, very simple. Again, it's a kind of very reduced idea in a way, just about levels of reinvention year on year. I think I talked a little bit right at the beginning about steam and beauty. I think a lot of another kind of area we kind of interested in is resourcefulness. And in a way that can be resourceful in lots of different ways. It can be resourceful with a budget, or it can be resourceful with an idea. In a way, I'd say that the Frieze campaign is resourceful because it's a single idea that you can kind of roll out. It's got an efficiency to it. This is a one-day fair, so how do you deal with signage? Sorry, it's a 4-day fair, so how do you deal with signage that's 4 days? You've got to try and make it disposable and ideally recyclable. We worked a little bit with a cardboard box manufacturer for another product that we brought out. So we started working with them to produce boxes that were effectively basic cardboard boxes, but they really loved it. They had these really beautiful, rich, silk-screen colours on them, which worked as a kind of system. So underlying everything we're doing is a kind of system, kind of a rational system that kind of works. And they were just pinned out on the day. So on the day, they could just literally staple onto the units. If there was a spelling mistake, you could peel off the information because it was all vinyl cut, which actually ended up doing on site. It was very rapid, it was very kind of quick. So I guess out of function, which I think is another probably common theme in a lot of work, out of function comes a solution. And then another problem, another art fair happens, which is a sort of sister organisation, Frieze Masters, which deals with not contemporary art like Frieze Art Fair does, but with everything from 10 years and beyond. So everything from modern art through to antiquity. This was a mark we drew based on Albertus, so a humanist mark that had to have some kind of connection with Frieze Masters, had to sit together. Although they don't share anything other than the name itself, there had to be some kind of synergy between the two. And then for the marketing, another very simple device, which was, again, trying to avoid a hero image. We were lucky enough to have access to the National Gallery and the National Gallery's resource of paintings. So we chose that as an opportunity just to use details. This is a picture by Bronzino, and this is how it was broken up. So it allowed us to break everything, all the applications up, quite functionally in a way, into all the requirements based on how we searched around the painting. This is year 2. Again, how it was broken up. So you have this real kind of rich texture. Nothing about it was scary, but it had a kind of oddness to it just by virtue of how you kind of took things and cropped things and isolated and selected them. And the nice thing is it's amazing how you can make cardboard go from being kind of pop to being quite kind of sophisticated. This was a very different feeling fair. This was much less raw. It had a much more sort of sophisticated sort of sensibility about it. Materiality plays a big part in what we do. I think no more, I mean, you can probably see it through the work I've shown already, there's a sort of, we've got a real interest in physicality, I guess. Appropriate materials for what they're representing. And I think there's no better place where you see that than in, say, some of the publishing we do, some of the books we do. We do a lot of work with a gallery called Gazing, based in London and New York and LA and various places, Hong Kong. And this is a quick sort of, these are not all the Gazing galleries, but this is just a quick trip through a few books and a little chat about materiality. So this is Avalon's Women. This is a catalogue based on, from the that was worked up with the Abdo Foundation in Gagosian, based on his female portraiture. So the material was very simple. In a way, it was a very kind of simple structure. It was a folded book, no stitching, held together by its own kind of weight. The format comes from the format of the photography, full bleed images throughout. But I guess the detail that's running through it is that the lighting gels, photographer's lighting gels, were used as a kind of this kind of intrusive sort of device, this bit of colour running through it. The majority of Abdo's work, not all of it, the majority of Abdo's work was black and white. Certainly, a lot of this collection was black and white. Art of typewriting. This is a collection of artworks, all based around typewriter art. I'm not sure if it's still available. If you can get this book, it's a really beautiful book. It's on two collectors. It's based on two collectors' collections. And well, let's talk about the cover to start off with. So we created an algorithm that worked with digital printing to create sets of covers, unique covers, so that everything was different. So it reflected, I guess, some of what was going on inside, some of this kind of concrete poetry, this kind of odd kind of movement that was running inside. Some of the work inside, very beautiful work. And then, I guess a little bit like the Abdo, talking about materiality and in the way that we're using light gels as a kind of reference point, trying to find ways to reference things back. So the divider ribbon had this red-black colour running through it as a kind of nod back to the origination of the work. Tor Bonci, who I mentioned earlier, who's a student beauty, I bumped into at the airport today. Very nice to see him. This was a book that we did, a combination of his work. We did a lot of Tor's work is quite odd in some. It has a sort of, well, it's quite odd in that it juxtaposes two things. A lot of it's very decorative, almost quite whimsical, very kind of pretty, and then he'll often do an odd intervention. So he might make a very decorative pattern, but he will burn it with nails into a piece of furniture. Or he will make kind of a piece of furniture and he'll pour something sort of slightly disruptive resin on it. So there's sometimes this odd kind of juxtaposition between very pretty and quite odd. So this book, we did a cover and we looked at ways that we used some of the book binding material that would traditionally be on the inside of the book to wrap the book on the outside. And then how can you reflect it inside? So he did a piece of a collection of works that were based on taking nails, pattern making in nails, and pressing them into hot glass or into furniture or routing them into metal. So we looked at ways of taking the sections and kind of doing the same. So in the text sections, 16-page or 8-page sections were folded and then punched with a nail block. So you've got this kind of detail running through, and you kind of got this fade of detail as you went through, sort of disappearing as the nails sort of went further away from the source that it was pressing. Crash, a catalogue based on J.D. Ballard's book Crash, which in turn was an exhibition based on the book for Gagosian, using some of the qualities that you might find in an old car. So actually I think one of the things we love to do is try and find techniques or materials or go to that part of the samples library which everyone avoids because they're too nasty to use. And this was a great opportunity to do that. So welded plastics where the foam internally was exposed, and it had this sort of sense of, well, it had a sense of the vinyl car. Graphic reference to car graphics internally and high foils, as again reference back to the kind of world of the car and the chrome. And then these were made into posters. The same technique was taken, silk screen, and made into posters. So we had big kind of A1 posters. A1, A0 posters. This is a weird project in many ways because, again, I think this is a bit about resourcefulness and resourcefulness in finding creative opportunity where it might not initially be presented to you. So I'm putting this up because actually what's next is pretty bad. So Frieze London is another art fair, but it's based on photography that's hosted annually in London. It's set here. This is a Georgian. This used to be the old Inland Revenue building in London. It's called Somerset House. It's a Georgian building set on the South Bank, almost opposite the globe we saw earlier, actually. And it's a great venue. I mean, it's a sort of extraordinary building, and it's a great kind of. It's a cultural, not centre, but it's a cultural space where they have a programme of design and art exhibitions on. And Frieze London is being held in this space. It's a kind of warren of buildings. It's quite an odd space, very different to something like Frieze London, which is a big, pure, white space. And they had already created this. We were brought in New York in the very first year. They created this mark. That's probably the antithesis of anything we would ever do. I think branding is really hard, and I take my hat off to anyone here to anyone that does branding, and certainly anyone here that is involved in branding. But I think we kind of really hide away from trying to create logo types, or rather, not logo types, marks, as opposed to type that can be a logo, if that makes sense. But they had this, it had been slightly established, and we had to try and create a segue between what we were going to do and it. And actually, in the abstract, the two parts are not so bad in a way. So we started looking at a process that sort of bridges quite a long period of time from early 1900s to now. So you have Man Ray doing photograms, and you have Thomas Ruff doing photograms. It seems almost like a timeless kind of process. And going analog, going back to the dark room, we just looked at ways that we could create marks, really. I think I was trying to be Man Ray, but weirdly the technology is now so different, the chemistry is so different, you just couldn't get the kind of marks and shapes. But anyway, this was some attempt at trying to create something that had levels of abstraction, but connected it, and some levels of sort of emotional quality, but connected it back to the original mark. And then, so that's just stuff laid out. And then we were kind of interested, this is very low res, so hopefully okay. We were kind of interested in the fact that if you put these things together, they kind of start making accidental compositions. They start doing, you can try and do it in the dark room, or you can then take something that's analog and make it digital, and put it through its own set of variables to create things. And that's what we kind of really liked about it. There's actually a whole set of these that work. We kind of like the fact that you take something quite analog and that you then look at using something contemporary to try and create final compositions. So we did little tiny small animations with the pieces, the parts, the component parts, and they became the images. So it was a kind of randomness in a way. A bit about typography. So this is a set of books which is kind of, I guess, made by any child in the UK that was born within, I guess, the last, 50, 60 years. This is Ladybird books. It's a huge collection. You know these books? I don't know if they're out here. No. So these are a set of very small books, always the same format, kind of A5, slightly longer. And they were always illustrated, and they were about every topic you could possibly imagine. Sometimes they were stories, like Criticism of He, and sometimes they were factual, so a guide about trees or the weather. There's a great one actually, if anyone wants to look it up, about printing, about litho printing. And they always use this typeface, this unknown typeface in it. They were always beautifully illustrated. The same typeface is also used in these, which you don't really get anymore. There is one or two still existing, but these would have been the old police boxes that you could go and call the police when you went in emergencies back in the 50s and 60s. So there was something inherently English about it, and we had an intern from Switzerland who had loved it so much he drew the whole typeface up, so that became the basis for the typography. So you had this very kind of sort of classicism in a way, it's a bit of sort of British classicism, which worked against these sort of quite emotional, sort of more tactile kind of photographic. And then how do you change it? Because this comes back annually. So again, a little bit like Frieze, it's trying to make things you don't have to hugely reinvent, but you can shift things slightly to the right just to reinvent them enough. So we did different marks and we changed colour. First year, second year, previously it was second year, third year. Sorry, I should have made that earlier. Colour change. Sorry. That was the start of a device to shift it away annually. So third year. And then there were applications that required identifying, so you could add little bits of colour. So you had this rather nice play of sort of bleeding colours coming into these photographs. But again, it's trying to keep the level of sort of abstraction and kind of unknownness about them, I guess. And they became marketing. But the real reason we want to do the animation is because it's a very hard building to navigate around. It has lots of different entrances, and we really like the idea that you could put something contemporary in front of this space. So we have these LED screens. That flagged up really roughly built things, but they flagged the entrances. And then a little bit like those became little beacons. The work went on internally to signage. So this is some of the internal areas. You can see the kind of it's corridors with galleries and small spaces left and right. And there are certain kind of stipulations that you adhere to in terms of damaging walls, because it's a temporary show, it's a 4-day show, so there's going to be a huge amount of damage, but it's also quite a smart show. It's a selling show. So these gallery spaces are selling expensive works. So it's trying to create a system that is temporary, but kind of smart. So we used, there's two references that are like, one of the references in here. We used a sort of simple box system. We used a manufacturer that made boxes, portfolios for photographers, paper-covered boxes for photographers. The reference was going back to beautiful camera workmanship, anodized materials, coloured materials, anodized materials, to create these boxes, which were a combination of little anodized blocks and cardboard. And a really nice detail about them was that they unfolded like a box would. You could screw them on and then they'd fold back up. It's the last project, okay. Final theme then. Not missing the obvious, I guess. Or I think and trying to use cliche in a good way. I think as designers, we're always looking for cues that people understand, that people get. I guess that's what a cliche is. We do a lot of work for a company called Kvadrat, based in Copenhagen. You may or may not have heard them. If you're an architect, you probably would have heard them, or a furniture designer. They make textiles. They're a family-run company, and they make textiles. And they make a lot of textiles. There's probably textiles in this room. There are probably textiles on chairs you've sat on before. I guess most notoriously, famously, they make a lot of materials for a French company called Vitra, who make all the Eames products in Europe and in Asia. So they make a product called Havendale, which is the classic Eames rough material that you'll find on an aluminium Eames chair. One of their things is colour. They have this fantastic colour range. And we've worked with them now for about 10 years. And we do a lot of things. We do a lot of brand sort of policing, but we also do their marketing as well. And they're a design company. They're a design-led company who speak to other designers, I guess. They speak to architects. They speak to specifiers. And so from that point of view, we've got a head start because we can start to introduce languages that are not necessarily clear-cut, not necessarily obvious. This was probably the third or fourth campaign we did for them. Doesn't really need any explaining, I don't think. Giant industrial-sized balls of wool, which when we saw them in the factory, it's kind of wonderful because they're huge, kind of dwarfed with my kittens that like to play with wool. Sergeant Majors.